So I think I've mentioned before that I work in a bookstore, and it's actually a used bookstore, and I work at the trade counter, which means that basically I rifle through people's boxes from their storage units and try to find things that are worth taking and selling in a bookstore. One of the really fun things about that job is that you see some very strange stuff come in, and from time to time something will catch my eye that I just feel an instant connection to and think, I need to bring this home and make it a part of my life. What I'm trying to say is, I bought a gorilla. This is Maxine. I love her dearly. She's just gonna join us in the background here for today's video, and I also have the skeleton. So it's May, which means I should probably do another monthly reading recap for the month of April. I kind of wanted to wait until I finished the book that I will probably finish today, because it's a new release and I wanted to talk about it before the month was over, but I kind of realized there's not enough time for me to both film this video at the beginning of May and also finish that book in the same day. So I decided, what the hell, I'll just do the video and mention the book at the end. During the month of April, I felt like I wasn't reading very much and was kind of like upset with myself for it. But now that I have the stack of like everything that I read, and a few things that I don't have in the stack because I've either lent out my copies or I listened to them on audio, I actually did get through 9 books this month, as well as one that I DNF'd or did not finish, which I'm going to talk about right now. I tried and failed to read Carrie and Comfort by Dan Simmons. This is a long book. It's like 800 pages and the print is tiny and the margins are narrow. So I was just toiling and toiling, trying to get through like 5 pages at a time. It was taking me forever, and I read about 50 pages before I was like, this is not grabbing me enough to want to stick with it for 700 more pages of my life. I read through a lot of the 5-star reviews, and it just sort of confirmed that this is just not for me, because the people who were praising it, giving it 5-star reviews, were praising aspects that I kind of didn't connect with. I respectfully put it aside. Maybe I'll try it again later. Maybe if I find the terror really connects with me, I'll try this one again, but for now, it is not for me. But now on to the books that I actually did finish, and most of which I really liked. The first thing that I read in April was Off Season by Jack Ketchum. This was the first time I've read a book by Jack Ketchum, and I fell in love with it. So Off Season is a cannibal book. It is Jack Ketchum's first novel. He is like one of the progenitors of the splatterpunk / extreme horror genre. There's a lot of cruelty in his books, so I can't really recommend them to most people, especially when it comes to violence against women. There's a lot of very sexually uncomfortable stuff that happens in this book. That's not something that really bothers me so much, or it does, but it's, you know, I'm going into a horror book because I want to be frightened. I want to be confronted with these genuinely horrific things that really exist. So Jack Ketchum is very much horror rooted in real human cruelty, which is very much up my alley, but probably won't be up most people's alleys. But like I said, I absolutely loved this book. I felt just like I was on a sugar high when I finished it. It was such an exhilarating read. It's terrifying, and it feels like you're just going face to face with death for an entire book. And as much as this is a book that you read for the extreme violence and for just the sheer terror of it all, it is also well written. It's clever, it's kind of punchy and funny at times. I can't sing this book's praises enough. It's splatterpunk. The whole point is to be just nasty and grueling and uncensored and just utter torment. I also read 2 Junji Ito books this month. They're 2 of his shorter ones, and some of the less well-reviewed. So the first one was Censor, and it is about a town in the shadow of a volcano that spews this golden hair that gives people special powers. It is really short, especially for a manga, and especially for the big ideas that it presents. So I don't think that it is incredibly polished. I think it's very messy, but I really, really enjoyed it. I think the artwork is sublime, as always. I mean, that kind of goes without saying with Junji Ito. And even if the story is kind of all over the place and not very satisfying, the actual premise and the ideas are really fascinating. It's cosmic horror, basically. There's just some very interesting new agey type stuff about it that I really enjoyed. As always with Junji Ito, even if the narrative is weak or the characters are weak or it's all over the place, you always can fall back on just the utter gorgeousness of his artwork. I really enjoyed Censor. I would recommend it. And the other Junji Ito story I read was Ramina. This was like one of the ones I was most interested in. It's about a planet that emerges from another universe and just starts hurtling towards Earth and swallowing planets in its path. And it, you know, may be a living thing in the end. And it just so happens to share its name with the daughter of the scientist who discovers it. As it gets closer to Earth and seems to spell apocalypse, people start blaming her. I think Junji Ito really has the skills to make some bizarre, disturbing, like, sci-fi horror. I'm sorry to say that this is probably the Junji Ito story that I liked the least that I've read. It really does not focus on the body horror. It gets a little goofy towards the end. And there's really nothing about it that I would consider disturbing or scary or even remotely in the realm of just the beautiful grotesquerie that tends to be Junji Ito's world. It's very tame in comparison to the other ones, so it didn't really deliver what I was looking for. It is a more narrative and character-focused manga, which I happen to think is his weaker side, so that is why I didn't connect with this as much as some of his other stuff. There's still, as I always say, some nice imagery, and not as much body horror in this one, though. I can really only think of one sequence of just, like, true body horror, so I didn't hate it. But it certainly is my least favorite Junji Ito so far, which is very disappointing for me to say, but at least it was short, it was quick to get through. So the next book I read is actually one that I've currently lent out to a friend, so I don't have the book to physically show you, so I'm going to be talking with my hands a lot, so I'll do my best to figure out how to put a photo of the book's cover here-ish. Maybe. I don't know. My Work Is Not Yet Done by Thomas Ligotti. I've mentioned Thomas Ligotti a couple times on this channel now and would consider him to be potentially my favorite author. I've been just sort of slowly, languorously going through his short story collection, Songs of a Dead Dreamer. Thomas Ligotti's writing is intellectual, but it's not unapproachable. It's terrifying, it's existential, it has elements of cosmic horror. For me, Thomas Ligotti is H.P. Lovecraft without the racism. I hope. But My Work Is Not Yet Done is a novella / short story collection. I only read the first one because I thought that was just all the book was. I didn't realize that it was a sort of small collection with a novella and then 2 short stories at the end. They're all thematically linked. So I'm only talking about the novella / novel. It's about 150 pages, so, you know, it's a decent length. It's not a short story. And I thought it was fantastic. No surprise there. My Work Is Not Yet Done is the story of Frank Dominio, who works in this kind of prestigious company, it seems, and he is part of the higher-ups. There's this group of him and 7 other people, and the head of the company, I believe. And Frank begins to believe that his coworkers are conspiring against him. He's finding all these little things that he's sort of being framed for around the office. People just acting very strange towards him. And then before too long, he loses his job and he starts to really believe that there was a conspiracy against him. And from there, it turns into a story of corporate revenge. I just loved this book. It's funny, but it's also quite disturbing. Thomas Ligotti's writing is just indescribable. There are lines that just blow your mind with how simply he's able to state these very difficult to communicate truths. So you'll find a lot, at least I found a lot to relate to actually in this story. Of course it is a horror story. Frank Dominio is quite the psychopath, but in a very fun way that makes you kind of root for him in that sort of fictional world where you know, everyone deserves a punishment much greater than what they actually would in real life. I found it quite cathartic and quite funny and quite disturbing, and I would recommend it to most people, I'd say. But stay away from it if you don't like violence. After reading the extreme horror of Jack Ketchum and some of the intellectual ponderousness of Thomas Ligotti, I kind of wanted something straightforward, back to basics, and so I read Ararat by Christopher Golden. This, if you can't tell from the really lovely cover, is a piece of survival horror set on Mount Ararat in Turkey. This book has a fascinating setup. It is about an earthquake on Mount Ararat in Turkey, which is a real mountain, by the way, that uncovers a cave high up in the mountain, and it becomes increasingly clear that this cave might actually be Noah's Ark. They find corpses, they find basically the shape of a wooden ship, and they find something else that kind of bodes poorly for the explorers, and I enjoyed it. I was a little worried going in because the Goodreads ratings were all pretty average, and it seems to be kind of the case with all of Christopher Golden's work, that it's, you know, it's fine. It ticks the boxes. It does what a horror story should do. It definitely reads very conventionally. The characters unfortunately feel like they're kind of ripped from like a John Sanford book, which feels like a pretty damning thing to say. There's like the secret government agent worker named Ben Walker, and he is gruff. It's a very typical story. Once it starts to reveal where it's going, what it's about, I didn't lose interest, but I did kind of feel my heart sink because it was a lot less interesting than I had hoped. I enjoyed it. There was never a point where I was bored. If you're looking for just a fun beach read, or I don't know, maybe a rainy day read or something, it's perfectly fine. I have nothing against it. It's not the brilliant piece of survival horror I had hoped it would be, but I still enjoyed it. I'm not usually an iced coffee gay, but it's 100 degrees in Tucson right now, so screw it, I'm drinking iced coffee. And at least it's not from Starbucks, right? It's local. Come on, think better of me. So the next book that I want to talk about is probably the biggest surprise of the year for me. It's a piece of extreme horror published by Grindhouse Press, which is a very small publisher. They do 10 to 12 books a year, and I had never heard anyone talk about it. It just kind of came up on my Amazon recommendations as I was kind of looking through Jack Ketchum stuff, and it is Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. I want to say right off the bat not to let the small publisher deter you from this book. When it comes to extreme horror and the really niche stuff that people who are really into the horror community are looking for, that's just kind of what you have to look to. Mainstream publishers, even the ones that do specialize in horror, are not going to publish this kind of stuff because it is really intense. Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana is something I'm comfortable calling a masterwork of extreme horror. This is possibly the scariest book I have ever read. It crept into my skin, it crept into my soul, it made me feel dirty and just depressed. I know that doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement, but for me it really is. This is what I come to horror to experience. I want to feel that I've gone through something. Gone to See the Riverman is kind of a commentary on serial killer obsession and serial killer infamy that is really popular nowadays with true crime documentaries and the resurgence of people thinking Ted Bundy was really hot and did nothing wrong. And it follows a woman who is obsessed with serial killers, and in particular one specific serial killer who's kind of from this backwoods river area. And at the beginning of the book, she actually goes to visit him in person, and he gives her a sort of mission to prove her loyalty to him. He wants her to go to his shack by the river, and that there she will find a chest with a key inside of it, and she is to take this key to the Riverman. That's pretty much all the information she gets. So she actually decides to do it, and ill-advisedly brings along her sister, who basically never developed past being a child, and it's hinted at that this is the result of a brain injury at a young age. This story goes to places so dark, I would never have guessed that that's where it was going. As this story progresses, it gets increasingly more dreamlike and, well, maybe nightmarish is a better word. I tore through it, partially because I found it riveting, but also because I couldn't bear to live in that world longer than I had to. And even weeks after finishing the book, I am still having nightmares about it. I am terrified of it. It's constantly on my mind. It's beautiful. It is beautiful, and it is grotesque and hideous and ugly. It's Jack Ketchum meets Lovecraft. And if that sounds like 100% up your alley, you have to read this book. It is one of my favorite books of the year. The final moments of the book are just seared into my brain. There's some beautiful writing, some terrifying writing. God, it has just cast a spell on me. It's unlike anything I've ever read before. God, I love it. Please read Gone to See the River Man. You thought I'd already met this video's negativity quota, didn't you? Probably not. I didn't even really tear into Carrion Comfort that badly. The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. I feel the need to clarify right up front that I did not read this. I listened to it on audio. So, here's the thing. The Last House on Needless Street is, not good. Okay, I don't know. It's not for me, and I think the reasons that I was so frustrated and let down by it are twofold. First of all, the narration was grating to me. I really did not care for the narrator. This is a book that has multiple perspectives. It just so happens that one of the characters is a female cat, and the narrator puts on what he seems to think would be a female cat's voice. And I wanted to turn it off every time. Like, genuinely, it got to the point where when I would hear that name as the start of the next chapter, I would actually, like, not... I would want to turn it off. I would be like, no, can we please not? There may be a reason why they didn't choose to do multiple narrators. That doesn't change the fact that I couldn't stand the narrator that they did choose. The other thing is that this is a book that is shelved and marketed as horror, which I think is misleading to the point of dishonesty. Horror is different for everyone, but once you get to the end of this story, once everything is unraveled, and once you get the full picture of the story, because it is sort of a fragmented narrative that gradually sort of comes together, I have to say in a very predictable way, there is nothing that I would say is horror adjacent, even. It is centered around a kidnapping. So, you know, I guess there's a few chapters here and there that are uncomfortable, but just when I think of what horror is, at least to me, it's not The Last House on Needless Street. This is like a psychological thriller, and that's being generous. I think genre distinctions are generally stupid, but when something is shelved as horror and not psychological thriller, I am expecting to avoid a story like this. Like, this is 100% something that I would shelve in thrillers or mystery. Like, it is just baffling to me that this would even be sold as horror. Coincidentally, Rachel at The Shades of Orange, which is a YouTube channel that you should definitely go check out if you haven't already, Notice Me Mommy, just made a video talking about her problem with contemporary horror fiction, and specifically like what's being released right now. And she made a great point that horror is coming more into the mainstream, more people are interested in reading horror, so anything that could be somewhat considered horror is sold as horror because it'll reach a larger audience. She didn't name drop any specific books, but all I could think was Katrina Ward. While I like her writing style, I should clarify that, I don't think she is a horror writer. So, tangent aside, The Last House on Needless Street, it's hard to describe what it's about because it's one of those books where the book is the twists. And frankly, I think the twists were incredibly poorly disguised, to the point where there were several moments where I genuinely thought, this scene only makes sense if something is revealed as a twist later, and then that line of thinking led me to predict the twist. There's nothing worse to me than a twist that makes me say, I already knew that. And that's how I feel about Katrina Ward's writing. I know a lot of people love The Last House on Needless Street. Good for you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I probably would have enjoyed it more if it weren't for the narration. Like, if I had just been reading it instead of listening to it on audio, and maybe someday I'll, like, actually test that for myself and just read a physical copy of the book. I will say, if you love The Last House on Needless Street and you haven't read Sundial yet, go read Sundial. You're gonna love it. Not for me. Didn't like it. Sorry. I did listen to the whole thing, so yay me, I guess. Alright, can I talk about something I liked? I actually can talk about something I liked now, because the next book I read was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So, I'm late to the party. Everyone's already talked about how wonderful this book is. I was a little worried going in that it had been overhyped. I'm not generally a Gothic story type of person. I like a good haunted house story. You know I love The Haunting of Hill House, but I much prefer the gooier stuff. I'm happy to say that Mexican Gothic is as good as people have been saying. I really, really enjoyed this, in large part due to the wonderfully written characters. The main character people have talked about a lot. You're always on her side. It kept me wanting to read. This is quite the page turner. You'll notice I also did a lot more annotations in this book than in some of the other ones that I've shown that I have annotations, and there were just a lot of really lovely passages in this and things that I found really relevant. There's lots of discussion of eugenics and racism. Not a lot of people have talked about how nuts it gets. I was expecting this to be a very patient story, a very, typical Gothic psychological ghost story, which it is, but it's also a mushroom trip of a book. A lot of Gothic stories like this feel rooted in some variation of reality, even if there's ghosts. But Mexican Gothic firmly goes in the direction of this could never happen in the real world stuff, which I love. It's very likable. It's almost like the Parasite of contemporary horror fiction right now. Everyone loves Mexican Gothic, and I am one of those people. I love Mexican Gothic. Beautiful, fun, all manner of good things in this novel. And another book that I am late to the party on that people on BookTube have just been raving about for the longest time and that I was very excited to read, Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. If you're not aware of this book, it was recently translated into English. So this is a post-apocalyptic literary horror novel, I guess I would call it, which is set in a future where a virus has rendered animal meat completely inedible, and the solution to this that the meat industry and the government see is to start breeding humans for the specific purpose of meat consumption. It is, I think, very clearly a comment on the meat industry. I thought it was great. I think it's a really well-written book. It has some very disturbing imagery, especially when it comes to the lengthy and detailed descriptions of the way the human meat is slaughtered and processed. I don't think it's a 5-star book for me. I didn't really feel as much from it as a lot of people seem to have. I think in order for this book to have a really profound impact on your life and your own eating habits and to make you think about the world around you, it requires a degree in the belief that this could actually happen. And I don't think I ever jumped that hurdle. We have lab-grown meat today. There are other alternatives that I think the world would be much readier to grasp than just going off the rails and eating people. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps I'm too much of an optimist. However, it is a really fully realized world. Like, if you get over that hump, everything that follows is very in line with what you would expect. As far as the actual writing goes, a lot of personality comes across, which is a great testament to the translator. Sarah Moses was the translator, and really kept a lot of the poetry, the descriptions of viscera. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It is more of a tour of a strange and disturbing world than sort of a complete narrative. Like I said, very literary, very beautifully written. I have very little negative to say about it. So that's it for everything I read in April. I do want to quickly mention my current bridge books and things that I want to read in May. If you saw my TBR from my last video, you'll know that I checked off like one book from that, because I am very much a mood reader. I have my I'll get to it soon pile, but I also do have times where I'll buy a book and just want to start reading it that day. I am currently reading The Fervor by Alma Katsu, not to be confused with Urban Fervor by Kevin Grisham. This is her newest release. It's the first Alma Katsu book that I have read. I'm almost done. I'll probably finish it. Well, by almost done, I mean I'm like 200 out of 300 pages in, but I'll probably finish it today. I was really excited for it, and so far I'm not let down. I'm enjoying where it's going. It is a bit predictable, but I'm still enjoying it, and I won't regret reading it. I mentioned in my last video that I wanted to read House of Leaves in April, which was, it turned out, a very ambitious task. I am enjoying it, I think. I'm 41 pages into this very long book, and I know as it gets to the end, there's a lot of stuff where there's very little text on any of the pages, but yeah, I think this will take a lot of time to get through. Not because I dislike it, just because it's requiring a lot of me. So we'll see. I would like to be able to finish it in May. And my other current read is another Junji Ito. I like to have a manga going on it generally all the time. Tomi. Which I'm only a couple chapters into, and I have to say, so far, I don't know that I'm hooked. I think it's interesting. I'm enjoying it. We'll see how it stacks up with the rest of his when I'm done. So that's it for that. Say goodbye to Maxine and whatever your name is, but you'll see them again soon. Thanks for stopping by, and have a spooky, spooky day.